Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on developing and debugging workflows with the TypeScript SDK and Visual Studio Code or VS Code. My name is Milena and I am a team member here at Temporal. And then lastly, if you want to stay connected with us, I encourage you to check out our community page, which you can do by scanning this QR code or by visiting temporal.io/community. And from there, you can join our community Slack and our community forum. We have a pretty active community between our Temporal team members and other end users, so I really encourage you to give that a try. All right, so let's jump into our presentation for today. I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's speaker, Steve Kinney. Steve leads a team that works on the UI and collaborates with the SDK team to help make developing and debugging workflows easier for Temporal users at the end. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Steve.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let me just share my screen. Awesome. Hello, everyone. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about just developing, debugging workflows with the TypeScript SDK and more importantly, the Visual Studio Code plugin that we released about 6 months ago. As well as just a bunch of the new features in the UI that you may or may not know about. Some of these are coming in the next release the next day or two, so if you don't immediately see them, it's okay, but there's things to kind of get excited about somewhat soon, and I'll show you actually how to see preview features as well. And so I have everything we do today is in this repo. We'll drop in the we'll share separately. Or you can see it here as well. I decided to do a little bit of live coding today so that like if there are patterns or like approaches that I use that's slightly different than what you've seen before, I can kind of explain to you as I go along. So if you look at the code later, it makes sense. If that has been too much to anger the demo gods there, or you want to see the completed example, there is one here. I'm going to work on a live coding branch that I'll also push up at the very end of this as well. So you can kind of, if I take some liberties as we're live coding, that will be captured as well. And if I've upset the demo gods, we can actually just review a known working example. So we'll try both of those out. But yeah, for the most part, we'll kind of just go through the flow, see some of the tools that, like I said, you may or may not know have existed, and that hopefully will make it easier for you when you are developing your own workflows. Awesome. So I've got basically a clean setup with Temporal CLI's dev server running. And let's go take a look at kind of the like shell that I have in place. Now, as I mentioned before, we are going to use the VS Code plugin and kind of just a few notes. Right now, it's kind of we have this hypothesis that building great developer tools that make it easier to develop workflows is a good idea. And so kind of our first foray into trying to see like, is there interest in this, like is this, that's our hypothesis, we'd love to validate it, right? Was to do a simple plugin which started as a kind of internal proof of concept from Rowie on the SDK team, and then kind of came with my team to add some of the additional polish. And we have a hypothesis that adding a lot more to this plugin is probably valuable. So, for right now, what you can do with it is you can actually like step through and debug a TypeScript workflow. But I think we've got some grander ambitions of, even being able to like kind of see running workflows, startup workers and stuff along those lines. I say all of this because if you have something that you would like to see or an idea that you think would be really cool, definitely reach out to myself or anyone on my team in the community Slack, and we'd love to talk to you about it. And so I kind of want to like start collecting ideas from the community to see like what would be the most valuable to you. With that, we'll kind of like go through the process of putting together a very simple workflow. We'll use the tool to kind of see how it works. And like I said, we will then kind of take a tour of some new features that are either have arrived recently or will be arriving very shortly in the UI, so you can get excited about those as well. So this is if you need to install the plugin, you can just go inside Visual Studio Code. There's also a link in the README to the repo, that will allow you to kind of go ahead and install it. It's just Command-Shift-X, and then if you type in the word temporal, you will find it. There's like 3 other ones, but you'll look for the logo. With that installed, like that's basically all you need to do. But let's go ahead and like go through some of the kind of flow here. I've got a little bit of a boilerplate set up for like a pseudo background check. We've got some just kind of like dummy activities. Those nobody wanted to watch me write those, so we'll keep those in there. But we do need to add a little bit of code to our client, our worker, and our workflows. And I'll kind of show you like, yeah, I'm going to assume that probably for a lot of you, if you've signed up for this particular webinar, that like you've done, you have at least the context of what is temporal, some amount of TypeScript as well. So, we won't go too much in there, but just in case, you're like brand new and this is your first webinar, I thought I'd take the opportunity to at least kind of like go through some of the basic like ideas, and you can watch me kind of put one together, and maybe that'll elicit some questions that we'll talk about during the Q&A period. Or maybe it's just nice to see somebody else do what you do all day. So with that, we've got the activities. We want to set up like some workflows as well. You can see that I've got basically just an empty function here that I'm going to fill out as I go along. Let's make that window a little bit bigger. I'm worth it. And so we've got this human verification workflow. We will set up a worker and the client to run the workflow as well. And we'll kind of talk about some of the patterns as we go through this. So with the workflow itself, one of the really cool things about the TypeScript SDK is, Temporal has, for your activities, they can have side effects, they can make network calls, they can do all sorts of things. But our workflows, we seek for them to be, completely like idempotent, like they run the same way every time, no side effects whatsoever. One of the really cool things that the TypeScript SDK does is it makes use of some of the features in V8 to like spin off processes, so that like your workflows are kind of run in a separate process from the activities that have the side effects, adding an extra level of safety. And there's a few like moves that we need to do in order to like get all of that safety, but I would argue that the amount of benefits that you get out of it is worth it for the safety measures. So we'll kind of just do a few things to like fill out this workflow. We can start out with like, some concept of, we could say, are they verified, right? Is this actually a human? We say verified, and we'll say, yeah, equals false. That seems great. And we've got some activities that we had defined, and I made a bunch of these. I don't necessarily need to use all of them. We can notify human for verification. We can run their credit report, run a background check, snoop on their social media, whatever we choose to do. Those are all options for us. And so in this case, what we can do is let's start with the like let's do the like await notify human for verification, right? And we will pull that in. We're not actually going to use the actual file itself, because remember, we have that like separation. And so what we'll use is this proxy activities function. The proxy activity basically, you give it the types for the activities, and it will give you kind of placeholders. And then under the hood, the TypeScript SDK will wire everything up with those processes, as we talked about earlier. So we don't necessarily, in our workflow code, because again, workflow code can't technically have side effects and all these things. So we kind of just, at one point, we'll tell it about where the activities are. We'll give the worker the activities to run, but your workflow code will have these kind of like placeholders that, when we kind of build everything and get everything ready, then you'll get all that safety for free. So we're not necessarily going to do this per se. What we're going to do is we're going to use that proxy activities method that comes with the TypeScript SDK, right? So we'll go in here and we'll say proxy activities, and we'll do the type of the activities. And the reason we do this is that it basically gives you like, now it knows, like TypeScript's able to use a type inference to figure out what the actual activities are, what their signatures are. So you get all the type safety of TypeScript as well. This is not, I got GitHub Copilot going on in here, and it's good, but it's not that good. So we can do start to close, timeout. We'll say 1 minute. See, sometimes it's great. It's nice when you're live coding, because no one needs that situation where I misspell a variable or like forget one thing and I stare at the screen looking confused for a little bit. So now we've got this, we can have this proxy version of this, which is what we'll use instead. So we'll say notify human verification, right? This is kind of the safe version we can go ahead and use. Let's say that like somebody will do the human verification. We've notified them. They're going to do something that lets us know that it's done, right? So normally the way we would do that is we'd create a signal. We'd have our workflow. Hey, when you get the notification that the human has verified, then we'll we'll pick up and we'll continue the workflow as we go. So we'll go ahead and we'll say we'll say verify and verify. We'll call it verify signal. Oh, I like that name. Now we'll do verify signal. Let's not deviate too much from what I prepared so that they kind of look mostly the same here. And so we'll define the signal. And we'll just say that this one has to, it's a verify in this case. We'll keep it very simple that we get this, and that will let us know that the human has gone ahead and verified this user, right? So we've got the signal now that we can use. We'll go ahead and we'll just say, we'll set a handler for it in the workflow. So handler here, when we get the verify signal, what we'll do is we'll say that that verified is now, nope, not that one. Verified is now equal to true, right? And so when we get that signal back from the outside world, that will kind of like set the next thing. And then we want to continue the workflow when we get that signal. That means we're going to wait for the verification to happen, and then we'll do like the next thing, so on and so forth. And so through the magic of having another branch where I've already completed the example, GitHub Copilot says, let's do this await for the condition that verify is true, right? Because this is falsy value. This function will return a falsy value. But however, it will return a truthy value once it's set. So we'll go ahead and do that. And let's have it like, I don't know, sleep for a day. That seems like a nice, let's go with a day. Nice feature of Temporal is that you can kind of have these things sleep. Temporal can go down in that day, it can come back up. Any of your background services, you could go down, kind of come back up. Everything will just work. That's the value prop that we're offering here. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then let's do another. Let's pull in, I don't know. Let's do the collect feedback, and we'll put that in place here as well. We'll do that like after the day. This mostly will make sure that I have a running workflow, so you can see that you can do this for both running and completed workflows as well. And we'll save that. We can put another one in here if we want. We can do like Snoop on social media, and we'll do that like here as well. Cool. So as you can see, it has the type of activity, so it knew basically all the activities that I had handed it, and everything is set up with the right type, even though it's kind of a proxy of that activity, which is great. And so we'll save that. We do need to do a little bit more work. We've got to, kind of add some additional data to our worker, and then we've got to set up the client that will kind of start up. It'll start the workflow. It'll send the signal, and kind of get everything moving for us. So we'll go over into the worker. You can see I've done a few things here. A lot of our examples, it's kind of assuming CommonJS, which is great. And like I would still say at this moment, probably the more commonly found in a code base, usage, right? Like that in package JSON, you can set, if you set, that's not package JSON, if you set type to module, you get ES module support by default. And if you don't have this, it's CommonJS. So there are some differences in the way both of those work. And so I thought this was a cool opportunity to show you that if you're using ES modules or something along those lines, so some of the little things that you might need to change or do differently is a good way to spend our time together. And like for other things like Dino, where you will get kind of these stuffs by default. I know that right now the TypeScript SDK does not work in Bun, and that's because Bun doesn't support all of the Node.js hooks just yet. So like my suspicion is 1 or 2 more releases of Bun, and you should be able to use the TypeScript SDK with Bun as well. And those are TypeScript first instead of that whole transpilation step. So, a lot of, in Node, you can choose, and if you like the patterns we have in our samples, definitely do that. But if you are using one of these other runtimes, like where ES modules are the default, like these are kind of moves that you'll have to do in some way, shape, or form. And they're more about the actual environment than anything else. And so one of the things is like require doesn't exist when you're using ES modules. However, there is this kind of helper built in modern versions of Node called create require, where you take the URL, the import meta URL that ES modules use, and you can kind of like recreate the ability to do that require resolve. So if you, for some reason in your code base, had to set type to true or type to module, and you then like, oh no, my my workflows don't work, you can go ahead and change like extensions to like CJS for common JS for those files, or you can go ahead and create a helper like this. And I'm going to end up creating in two places, mostly just to show you. I didn't want to hide it away in a utility, but this will kind of like unblock you in that sense as well. So we've got that, and our worker is going to be pretty simple at this point. This one we're pulling in the real activities here as well. And what we'll do is we'll just make a worker. And the nice part also, kind of in modern versions of Node is you have top level await. So you can just kind of, you don't have to do this thing where you define a run function and call it. Like depending on which version of Node and like your setup, you might need to do that. But like for like, I think I'm not going to try to guess and try to remember which version of Node supported top level await. So we've got those workflows path, right? Workflows path is a variable, so that'll get like put right in here. The activities we've got as well that we're importing on line 5, and then task queue, which is the other required variable. Sure, human verification. That sounds like a great name for a task queue. And then we'll just say await worker dot run. Right, so we got all that in place. So that's our worker. And then all we really need to do at this point is flesh out the client. We will make one more file at one point, but I'll show you that in a second. Cool. And so I've got some just little helpers here that I'm using so that you don't have to watch me write weird code. So we'll go ahead, let's create a handle for that new workflow that we want to start. This is, the thing that would start and call the workflow somewhere maybe in your code base. But we just, this is kind of an example. So we'll do in this file here. So we'll do client workflow start, and we want that human verification workflow. And we've imported that as well from our workflows folder. And what we'll do at this point is we'll say, okay, the args are, let's say, sure. We'll pass that in. Like this might be whatever the identifier in your database is, something along those lines. Human verification, since I am making live coding decisions, yep, I'm just gonna make sure that I'm auto completing that correctly. And then we'll give it needs a workflow ID, right? This is that business use case kind of workflow ID. We'll say it's like verification, why I'm treating myself to spelling while I'm doing this is anyone's guess. And we'll give it just a random ID so that we've got something in place there as well. So we've got that handle. And then really what we want to do is I'm just going to say, wait for a second, something. And then we're going to send it that signal. Again, this would happen somewhere else in your code base when the human took the action to go ahead and send the signal. But like, I could do it separately, but like we'll trust the code. We'll wait a second, and then we'll immediately verify them. And so then the way that we send a signal to the workflow is we'll say just on that workflow handle, we'll handle signal. We'll send it that verify signal that we made earlier. Great. So that should go ahead and handle everything. We got to do an await here because that returns a promise. Thank you, TypeScript, for catching me. It's nice when the live coding works in your favor, right? So we've got all that in place, and that should, barring some terrible choice on my end, go ahead and give us a working example, right? Cool. And so we'll go ahead and we'll check out the UI. And if I refresh, you should see I have a running workflow. Now, one of the cool things that all the SDKs do is they have this idea of a replay. And like if you've heard of the conference that we ran a month ago, that's where the name comes from. And a replay is really cool. What a replay does is allows you to take an event history of a workflow, right? Running, completed, what have you. And it lets you, wait for it, replay that workflow. And what that does is kind of goes through all the steps of the workflow, but insofar that workflows are idempotent, right, which means they are effectively pure functions, right? We know the input and the result of every activity that went through on a workflow's been run. So the replay allows you basically, it just skips the actual calling of the activity because it knows when it went out and lets you step through the workflow again. So what we have in that IDE plugin that I teased a little bit earlier is we can hook into VS Code's like debugger runtime, and we can allow you to actually step through your code to see like what was going on in each piece. And there's two ways to do that. If you know the workflow ID and run ID of the workflow, you can actually do it directly from the extension from there as well. But the other useful thing you might choose to do is if you go in the workflow, you've got the ability to download the event history, right? And what I can do in that case, I can either choose, I'm not using data encoder, so I'm going to not decode the event history. You can choose to keep it encrypted. You can choose to decode it. That is a relatively new UI feature that we shipped not too long ago. So if you don't see this, just make sure you're running the latest version of the Temporal UI, and you should have this feature. So go ahead and we will download that. Awesome. And now what I can do is I can, in VS Code, I've got to move some of these zoom controls for a second here. I can say that we wanted to temporal open panel, right? And now this gives you this kind of temporal panel right here where, like I said, we have, if there is interest, if these tools seem useful to you, we have ambitions to kind of add a lot more here as well, but kind of as a first foray, you've got the ability to connect to wherever your temporal server is running, right? As you can see, you can do client servers and private keys. So if you wanted to point this at temporal cloud, you absolutely could as well. But we've got this main section here where I said before, you could put in the information about the workflow you want, or if you have a file in question, you can go ahead and you can choose it and we can hit start. Right. Oh, I didn't. I have an error, which is a good error, which is I didn't do one important thing that you do need to do in order to set this up is you do need to specify like add a little bit of code for running the debugger replayer. So what we'll do here is we'll add a debug replayer. And this is meaningful with the IDE plugin, but you can, if you want to call it a different file, put it somewhere else, you absolutely can as well. That is the setting for the IDE plugin that you can configure. So we've got this debug replayer, and it's not actually a lot of code. Really, what it is I'll show you kind of initially what the code works, and you'll know why it won't work immediately. But then we'll do that trick that we did before, and it's gonna be great. So we'll start the debug replayer from temporal worker, right? So it's built into the TypeScript SDK, and it interacts with this IDE plugin. And it wants a workflows path as well, so it kind of knows where to do this. And I have that issue of, theoretically should have the issue of require resolve not existing in ES module. So all I need to do in this case is do that create require that we import from module. And like I said, if you're using CommonJS, you don't need these two pieces, right? It'll all just work out of the box. If you are using a runtime that is ES module based, and all this is doing is getting us the right file path. You could also just have a hard-coded string here. You can use some other method, like whether it's environment variable. As long as this is a string that points to where the workflow files are, you should be good to go in that sense as well. So we've got that in place, and this allows us to kind of interact between the code that, the worker code that you're running and the IDE plugin. So with that, we will go ahead and we will hit start. And if you look, now I have this history tab, right? And the history tab is super interesting because it allows us to kind of see the different places inside. I do seem to have an error here, which I think is partially due to my setup. So I might have to, do a quick change real quick here in some changes I made right before this, but we'll handle that pretty quickly, where I'm just going to do on my end, I'm going to do a PM install. You do need TS node installed. So we'll go ahead and we'll install that, and we should be at that point in a little bit of a better place. Those last minute changes that you make right before you start presenting to all your friends, that's usually where it happens. Cool. Let's see. I have now yet again tempted the demo gods, which is great. So we'll go ahead and might have to try this out in a second with another repo, but that's totally cool as well. It's fun to watch somebody play around with this a little bit, right? Cool, cool, cool. So the other there, luckily we're professionals here, and we have a, like I said before, a version that is baked a little bit too that we can check out. So let's go ahead and we'll do that in this case. So like I said before, we actually my colleague Lauren has a blog post. We also kind of goes through a very similar version of what I'm going through as well. And we actually in our samples, we actually have a example where you can just run it in this case as well. So let's go ahead and let's do that, and then we'll see the baked version, and then for the live coding completing sample, I'll have those updated as well. But rather than watch me struggle with things that are not incredibly important for the main topic we're having, we're going to go ahead and just kind of pull one out of the oven, as they say, where we'll call it, yeah, sure, VS Code Debugger. That seems like a good name. And you can do this with any of our samples. You can basically do an npx at temporal.io/create, and then the name of the sample, the directory you want to put it in, and the name of the sample that you want. And it will pull any of those down, and you can just start and run it. So if you don't want to like necessarily pull down the whole samples repo and navigate into each one, what you can do is you can go ahead and just pull down just the sample you want, do the npm install and stuff along those lines. So in this case, we're going to go into this replay demo. I don't remember if it did an npm install, so I'm just going to run that real quick. And let's open it up. And you can see that there's not too much different in here as well. It's effectively the very similar to what you saw me do earlier. Other than the whatever kind of like live coding decisions I made on the fly that got me into this state. So what we'll do is in here as well, we can go ahead and just, we'll go temporal, open panel. I'm going to go ahead and just run this workflow real quick so that I have like a history that should match. So here we'll go ahead and we'll run the worker. So we'll say npm start. That'll give us the worker. And then in a 7, we'll do npm run workflow. And these are some of the changes that I made at the last minute so that you didn't have to watch me do this piece that probably got me here. Great. So we've got that in place. We've run the workflow. I'm going to go verify that over in the UI. So I can go back to workflows, and I've got that second workflow that's running. And I'll go ahead and download that history as well. So we'll go hit download, same as before. And let's see if I've now appeased the live coding deities, right? Cool. And so it's starting the debug session. You can kind of see some stuff happening with the call stack here. And if you look, so for this very first one, they didn't add this is one less activity than I wrote. You can look is that we can add breakpoints for any kind of like step along the workflow, as well as along the gutter here for places where you would like the debugger to stop. You can kind of see like where each thing is happening within the code. And what's really cool too is, Lauren used slightly different example data than I did, is that you actually see the value of like the arguments being passed to the workflow and stuff along those lines, and get like kind of introspection to what your code is doing as it's running, and kind of pause, and then you can kind of step through each piece, right? I didn't have any further breakpoints, so it tends to run through everything at that point, but I can also once again go in here and like I said, I can point at a workflow, I can go give it an event history. And this point we'll add another breakpoint here as well. And you'll see that I can kind of go, it'll drop me into that first one. My cursor's already there. And I can move to the next step, right? So on and so forth. And it'll show me where the next thing happened in my workflow, right? So if you've got a lot of conditional logic and you're wondering like what happened at a various place, and you wanted to know what the value of those variables were as you went through, you have all of this kind of like built in to this debugger. And like I said, we are open and happy to hear more. We've got a lot of kind of ideas about like whether or not we should show like you're running workflows, the ability to start a worker, or starting workflows from the sidebar, like whatever ergonomics make your day-to-day life easier. I think we are interested in kind of adding to this and creating some additional investments around this as part of, it's like kind of like bringing this out, like absolutely play around with it, like, and then reach out to us if there are things that you want to see. So we can go ahead and play through all of this. And that's the debugger plugin. So with that, let's also talk about some new stuff that has happened in the UI that, again, I think fills in that whole ability to like understand and develop and debug workflows, right? Kind of back and forth between both the Visual Studio Code as well as like the UI itself. Um, so one thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to also, I've got another kind of pre-baked thing, right? Because we have those two running workflows. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a whole bunch of other workflows, right? So that's happening over in another terminal tab. But we'll run those. We'll kind of have all of that in place. And so you can see that like, oh, wait, there's 5 new running ones at least, right? And 24 new workflows, 40, because I'm running this batch, like it's creating a whole bunch of different workflows. And so we actually have counts to show you for your entire system. This is imminent with our next release that we're cutting this week, early next week. You can see that like, oh, 40 new workflows have happened since the last time I refreshed the screen. And we made the decision, based on a sensibility that having this, especially if you're running lots of workflows, having this table like change all the time was probably not the best user experience. But we do try to notify you that stuff has changed. You can go ahead and refresh. And now you see you've got these high level metrics of like what's happening in this given namespace. So we've got 7 running, we've got 10 completed. I can even go ahead and, for instance, I can say, I'm gonna run it again. So this will be another, however many workflows end up getting run. So I'm on this page, that's gonna run. And then ideally we should see these numbers change, right? And so I can see that, oh, these are the number of workflows that have changed since the last time I loaded this table, and you can get a sense of that as well. So here I can go ahead and choose to now refresh it, right? Now we've got the 82 workflows, the overall path as well. One of the things I want to draw your attention is this little beaker over here, which is labs mode. One of the things we want to do is try to get like new ideas and new features out to you as quickly as possible. And, before maybe we fully nail down the experience, so we can kind of get them out into the wild and get feedback. So the what's in labs mode changes because as stuff graduates out, it just becomes a new UI feature. But one of the things, if you turn it on right now, you'll see that we have a new filtering experience. You'll see that the table column filters vanish, right? That was kind of some of the old approach that we had. And you get this kind of filter where you can actually pick something like, okay, workflow type, and then kind of build out your query. We'll say long running. And now it's showing just the long run ones. You see the counts are now based on that query as well, and that we know that we have a query in here. I can add additional pieces as well. And I can also kind of turn this back into the query that you would have written if you would like to see like what the resulting query was in this sense as well. And like I said, these change based on that. The other thing you might notice is we do have the ability to kind of do batch either cancellations or terminations. So here I'll take a few of these and I will do a batch terminate. You can give it a reason. We have some default values in here. Those seem good to me. And so that is now going to run in the background. As you can see, I did pick 5 of them. Out of the running 10, oh, there's a change of like 5 of them are no longer running. And there's 5 new terminated ones, right? And we can choose to refresh and see that as well. Other things that are kind of new and exciting in the UI are, if we go into a workflow, you can see this new timeline view, which takes your event history and helps you visualize it to kind of get a sense of like what was running when, what was running concurrently, so on and so forth. These are, some very kind of simple examples that I loaded up, but you can kind of get a sense and see everything about like how that happened like across the time as well. We've got the ability to like refresh here. A lot of the, I think, a lot of people saw we've got the workers, so on and so forth, and some of the new versioning pieces that came out. I showed you before, you can choose to decode the payloads. I don't have a data encoder set up, but there's a bunch of that in place as well that you can use. And I'm trying to think about if I missed any as I've been talking and clicking around, if I missed any of the kind of other interesting features that we're adding over time. And like I said, ideas, questions along those lines, please reach out to us, right? Like we want to make sure that the development experience is as smooth and easy for you as possible. So there's a bunch of like really kind of cool small things that we are kind of adding. And again, if you want to see that new stuff, you can turn on that labs mode. You'll, as we're trying out different things and trying to get feedback, you can try to test out some of these new things. Other thing we added was the ability to download as a JSON file whatever the entire like whatever we're showing you in the UI. So if you need to like parse out or do stuff with that as well, we've just tried to make that easier for you. Also, and with that, I think we're ready to kick it off to Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to set myself up here. We do have a few questions. Again, feel free to drop any questions that you may have using the Q&A feature. So the first question that we got, are debugging and the VS Code plugin exclusive to TypeScript, or can it also be used for other technologies? And if not, are there any plans to support other ones?
Yeah. So right now it is exclusive to TypeScript. That said, there is nothing necessarily like stops us from doing the rest. I know many of you know Chad. Chad actually built a very similar concept in Go. Right. And so I think that like we do need to at least standardize on the way that all of them work, but we've like now done a few of these spikes in a few different languages. And we know that like for definitely, obviously, we know that we can do it in Go and TypeScript. My suspicion is that just given the way that Python works, that's also, easy as well. So I think like yes, right now the kind of first foray into like validating, and again, part of that comes down to like we with time and attention being finite resources, making sure we're working on the right things to serve the community. And so kind of like if the TypeScript one is useful, I think we are very incentivized then to make further investments across the languages as well. But at this moment, to answer your question, it is TypeScript exclusive.
Got it. Thank you. All right, next question. Does the VS Code extension debugger still work if the workflow code is out of date? For example, a different version was deployed and the workflow they're debugging is based on an older version.
Yeah, in that case, because like it is trying to, VS Code is jumping through, right? It might with a different event history, it's very hard to like match that up. So the real answer to that question is it depends, which is not a particularly like fulfilling answer, but like is like as best as it can, like because it's using that data. But like for the most part, like if it's wildly different, then like there's not really a way to be able to do that.
Got it. All right, next question. Is there something similar for the Go SDK and IDEA IDEs such as Goland and or IntelliJ?
Yeah. So at this moment, no, right? And that's again like the what we're trying to basically figure out is like what the demand slash ecosystem is, because as most of y'all know, there are a lot of editors, right? Like we've got the IntelliJ family and the kind of JetBrains family of editors. We've got VS Code. I could wade into a Emacs versus Vim war, so on and so forth, right? And so big the question is, it's basically trying to figure out on our end based on for the community and like where the biggest interest is. Like we, part of it originally with VS Code is that like it, if one stack ranks the editors, it was the kind of widest appeal. But I think like obviously the temporal community, like we care more about the demographics of the temporal community than necessarily like who editors writ large, right? So I think based on kind of community interest, that kind of like helps to shape the plans around that. I know Ryland did a survey not too long ago kind of with these questions very specifically, to the temporal community of like what editors do you use, like SDK adoption to help us like at least choose the right bets to place to kind of make developing temporal workflows easier.
All right, next question. Does the timeline shows or does the timeline show slash highlight the retries?
I will answer this question from memory, so that's an implicit asterisk of I could be wrong, but I think at this moment it's taking the event history and with the pending activities, those are not in there, but I'm doing that one from memory of the last time I was looking at a workflow. So I do not think so, but I reserve the right to have been wrong on that statement.
Sounds good. All right, last question. Is the workflow server open source?
I'm not like by workflow server. I mean, most ever like our VS Code plugin is open source. The UI is open source. Temporal itself is open source. So I believe the answer to that question, yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, yes. Unless there was kind of a piece in there that I'm missing. But with all of our SDKs, the server itself, and the UI and the extension all being open source, I feel confident with the answer to that being yes, unless there was a nuance to that question that I missed.
Okay. Last thing, we had a tip from Nathan that said we had to set some VS Code settings to point to that debug file, and it was handy to set in the .vs code /settings.json file so the project has it set permanently.
Yep. VS Code sets all of its settings that are per project in that .vs Code settings. It is a, I will not wade in on the controversial issue of checking that file into version control so everyone on the team has it. Because I think themes and stuff like that, whatever. Like, I don't think you see a problem with checking the version control. I think it's totally cool. I understand that it's not everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, so you can basically, if there are special configuration that you need for the plugin, you can just check that into version control, and now you don't necessarily need to worry about like every individual person's settings. Like when they're in their project, they'll be configured correctly.
Ooh, thank you. Well, those were all of the questions that we had. We hope this information was really helpful to everyone who attended or is watching the recording. But before we depart, I did want to let you know about a couple of meetups that we have coming up. First, on Tuesday, we have the Halloween edition of our monthly virtual community meetup, and that'll be at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. GMT. And then on November 16th, we have a in-person meetup in Chicago for the Chicago Java Users Group. And that will be, again, on Thursday, November 16th at 5:15 p.m. Central Time. You can scan that QR code at the bottom of the screen to get to temporal.io/community. Other than that, I really appreciate your time as well as yours, Steve. Thank you so much for presenting today. And I hope everyone has a great week. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Everyone.